So to get us started, you're speaking here to a room full of UT Austin students, and since you were here on campus not too long ago, pursuing your Bachelor of Science in Physics, what can you tell us about your experience on campus and what you liked most and what orgs you were a part of?
It might be a little dull. I didn't do much except go to class. So I transferred here from a school in beautiful Canyon, Texas, West Texas State University, which has now been subsumed by the Texas A&M system. So I don't know if that means I'm half Aggie and half Longhorn now. That's probably some unnatural thing. Thanks, James. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'll stick on the Longhorn side because I graduated from here. But and I was just telling the story. Talk about a culture shock of a different kind. So at West Texas State, great little university, but it was small. It had about 8,000 students, and it probably is not of the caliber of UT. Let's put it that way. And so I had three majors: physics, chemistry, and computer science. And I had a 4.0, and I probably thought I was reasonably intelligent until I walked into the doors here, and 4.0 went to a 3.0, and I struggled for the next 2.5 years to get a degree in physics because it's a little bit harder here. So I didn't, I went to school and I worked. I put myself through school working at applied research labs. And then the last semester I worked at Tracor here in Austin. And then after that started, this kind of random walk that became my career. There you go. There wasn't a lot of partying in there.
You said you had three majors originally, but then you ended up pursuing physics here. Was there a reason you chose physics?
Yeah, first 3 years too damn hard. And I wasn't smart enough. Of all of them, I graduated here with a degree in physics and minor in computer science. And I liked chemistry, but when I had to choose growing up, I was always drawn to physics. I just liked to understand the way things worked. My grandmother literally gave me the 3-volume set book of the same name, which I tried all kinds of crazy experiments I won't bore you with. Some involved animals and electric current and things I probably shouldn't have been doing. But when I had to choose, because it was pretty clear I could only do one here, physics won.
And so all of those were from a very scientific background, and that scientific thinking that you developed over the course of your childhood and also your college career, how did that impact your movement into entrepreneurship in your career?
That's a great question. I would love to be able to say that my career path was very tightly planned, but I think my life's a little bit more like Forrest Gump, and just the sequence of accidents happened to me that kind of put me in, I think, some unique situations that maybe I made okay out of those situations, but I have a friend who planned out his entire life. We went to Stanford, he worked for Silicon Graphics, he was co-founder of my first company, and now he's a venture capitalist, and he pretty much planned everything and it went exactly as he planned. So we should get Mike here sometime and let him tell you that story. But for me, it didn't go that way. What I did find was, and this is just why I'm such a big believer in a physics degree, even if you don't pursue a pure physics job, is it teaches you how to learn, and it teaches you how to solve problems. And no matter where you go, if you're going to start any kind of company that builds some new product, and if you're in business, it is a non-stop stream of problems. Now, if I'd realized when I was in school how many of the problems would be people problems, I would have gotten a different degree. That I should become mildly accomplished at dealing with people for a horrible introvert, because I have a degree in physics, is still a mystery to me. But that's what that's the side. If you think you're gonna end up running a company with 500 or 1,000 people in it, and those people problems will be somebody else's problem. Maybe I should have hired better somebody to delegate that to, but if you care about the company culture and you really you want that to be a great place to work, you have to put your own thumbprint on it. So I never found a way around that.
And you said that you keep saying that your life was like a series of accidents, but I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. And so when it comes to
no, if you'd been there next to me, you'd fully appreciate how lots of people were really kind to me too along the way. So I'll stick with the accident part, but that's kind of you to say.
So when you started off, what career path did you originally want, or did you know that you did want to be an entrepreneur eventually one day?
Never, absolutely never. It was farthest thing from my mind. I thought, I just took physics because I like physics, and this is kind of embarrassing. I never thought about where I was going to have to get a job. I mean, I knew I'd be working. I was putting myself through school, and nobody else was going to pay for my living. But I didn't really think about, the competitive aspect of going and getting a job in physics. And so it was probably about a year out from graduation. I don't know what happened. I kind of looked around. Back then, there were only 7 people in my to-be graduating class. In that year, I graduated in December of '80. And I looked at them and went, uh-oh, like I won't beat any of these people in a, if we're both sitting in the interview at Lawrence Livermore Labs, I'm going to be working at McDonald's. So I need a backup plan. And since I kind of had one already, I was, doing Fortran programming. You could look that up in the history books. It's from a different century. I was doing Fortran programming at Applied Research Labs. I kind of defaulted into, maybe I'll do something, programming development related, computer science related, and that's kind of what happened. And so my first, if I don't really count Traycore because that was kind of an extension of Applied Research Labs, I took a job at Motorola programming high-speed memory test systems, primarily because I had the brilliant insight to go, well, I don't know, I think this computer thing isn't going away, and I don't know, I'm not sure it's going to stick, but, But mainly they were right next door to Traycore, and so I wouldn't have to drive any farther. This gives you a little insight into how I made my big decisions in life, yeah. Not that smart.
So when you say that you started off just going to computer science because you didn't feel that physics was the right way to go, with computer science, were there any telltale signs that you saw where it was taking off, or you thought, wow, I really need to get on this now?
No. I mean, I liked it. I was really interested in it, and it would probably, if there hadn't been physics, that's probably what I would have done. Mm-hmm. But it was never so interesting to me that I would have done pure computer science or even electrical engineering instead of. And I think this might sound a little bit arrogant, but one of the reasons is I thought, well, if you understand physics, you could always build that other thing. The reverse isn't true, right? If you can, and this is one of my beefs with some computer science programs today, is you can be very employable and functional as a developer and not really understand how computers work, and I think that's horrible. I think that's bad. But you can make a ton of money and be a great developer, and that's how good the tools have become. I think it's really important that you understand, like go write an assembler in assembler. That was one of the courses I took here. It sucked, but I learned a lot, right? Because you'll never get very far away from the computer that way. And I'm not sure that if I didn't have a physics background, I would have ever looked at it that way.
So moving towards more of the entrepreneurship side, what advice would you give to students that are interested in entrepreneurship, but they're kind of fearful of the financial risk, or they don't know where to get started?
There is a lot of financial risk. I've started 4, 2 failed. I learned more, way more from those failures than I did all of the successes. You know, you're super proud of the successes, but they don't. That's one of the things that I don't know. From 3 months into Spiceworks, probably the most successful one I've done, um, was really making me uncomfortable because I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know, every other e-staff meeting, we have e-staff meetings every week, Monday morning, and at least once a month, in the early days, I'm like, something bad's going to happen. It's got to happen, because that was my third one, and I'd seen it before, and my second one had tons of bad stuff happen, and it never really happened. Sometimes you get lucky. The amount of luck that's involved in these, if an entrepreneur sits up here, and I'm not saying they're not smart, they probably are, but if they talk about how smart they are and how much they knew everything was going to happen, and, you know, blah blah blah, I think that they're full of crap. Um, like Bill Gates is a smart guy, and he capitalized on luck. If IBM had caught one clause in the initial contract for MS-DOS, Microsoft would not be here today. But they didn't, and he drove a semi-truck through that hole. Good for him. Like, he was smart enough and did a million other brilliant things after that. But for lack of that one mistake, now he might have done some other company that was equally as great, but that one wouldn't have been there. That's how big a role luck can play. And so there is lots of risk. So you have to be comfortable with it. But what I would say is, I think there's an illusion that if you go to work for, you know, IBM or Google or Microsoft or Facebook, that's lower risk. And I will tell you it's not. It looks like it is, but what you don't see is when you're working away, somebody in an ivory tower can say, well, we had a bad quarter or a bad year, so we're going to cut 500 employees, and somewhere on a list is your name. The difference is you're not going to know it until it happens. In a startup, if it's the right kind and the right culture, you will know the instant things are rocky. I mean, we had a couple of situations at Spiceworks where I got up in front of the entire company. I said, here's how you'll know exactly if you're about to get laid off. You won't even have to ask me. I'm going to give you the cheat sheet so you can know on your own. Now, you can come ask me, and I'll tell you. But, like, here's what we're going to do. If things are going bad, you know, I'm not going to lay off salespeople first. They bring in the money. And if you're in marketing and you support those salespeople, I'm not laying you off. If you're in support or development and it's getting really tight, guess what, guys? It's just math. It's just physics, right? I have to go there first. And so, but once a company gets to a certain size or has a certain culture, you won't ever hear about that. And so it looks safer because they're more established, and those are all true, and they make more money. But the lack of information and transparency means it's highly likely you're going to get surprised. And so I'm a fan of control your own destiny. My wife says it's a unique skill of mine that I'm delusional in this regard, but I like the illusion of thinking I can control something. And so the more information that you can give people so they can make their own decisions, I think the better off they'll be. But it is risky. 9 out of 10 fail. That is a proven fact. And so, you know, if you take and you start 10 companies, 9 are going to be gone probably in 24 months. If you take and start 1,000, like every time you go to raise money, you hear these things, Series A, Series B, Series C. Every one of those, almost a factor of 10 less companies gets to that stage. So by the time a company goes public, one of the reasons it's so admired is you're now not 1 out of 10 companies. You're like 1 out of 10,000 companies make it to that size that they could go public or get bought. And so that just gives you a sense of how hard it is, but also how much luck has to be involved. That you don't, even though I'm delusional, I think I control it all, I don't. You just so many things have to go your way that you can't control. You can try to recognize them, but you can't make them happen.
And you're talking a lot about how it takes a lot for a startup to be successful, and resources, and then definitely a lot of luck is involved. How do you explain like the Austin startup scene and how it's a good place to start off, and how do you describe like the culture that we have established here in Austin regarding startups?
Ooh. I think Austin has a unique kind of meta culture when it comes to startups, right? If you take 10 companies, they'll all have very different company cultures. Often those cultures are a direct manifestation of the values of the founders. That can be good, that can be bad. But I think Austin in general, because of its place in the macro ecosystem, it's smaller, we've had way less big exits, we have a different value system, right? If you go off and start a company and you raise one round of money and somebody shows up and knocks on your door and says, I'll give you $50 million for that company, and you own 20% of it, I bet you're going to take it. Because $10 million will change your life. In California, you won't. Because the culture is different there. The culture there is you failed and you sold out, which I happen to think is crap. It's you started the company, it's your decision, right? Only you can make that. But there's a massive amount of pressure in that ecosystem to cause you to swing for the fence and turn that 50 million into 500 million or 5 billion. The part nobody tells you as the entrepreneur is the asymmetry of the equation. That VC that's telling you to swing for the fences, he has diversified his bets. You are one of 20 companies he put money into, but it's your only one. It's your entire life. And so if you swing and miss, you lose everything. He loses nothing. He actually planned to lose 18 out of the 20. As a matter of fact, if they do 20 investments, literally 66% of them, they will lose every dime. Nothing. They'll get no money back. And so he just doesn't know which one he's going to lose it all on. But for you, it's everything. And so, and when we were at those junctures at Spiceworks and in our later rounds, we did what were called secondaries, where the employees could actually sell some of their stock and make money. I encouraged people to think, look, think about this like you never get to do this again. We're going to take on this risk and take on a bunch more money, and you're going to have to go do a bunch of work. I'm not going to tell you to sell or not sell. I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm selling some. And then we can go swing for the fence, because now you get a little something out of it. You're not putting everything at risk. Because I think it's kind of your job as a founder and as a leader of the company to help people figure out how to manage that risk, because they're investing with their lives. There's nothing you have that's more important than your time. And if you go to work for a startup, you're an engineer, or you're in marketing or any role, right? Your time is just as valuable as mine. And so I wanted them to be able to get something out of it in return.
And as a founder of a successful startup here in Austin, you've been talking about Spiceworks. So for those in the audience that aren't familiar with Spiceworks, can you give us an elevator pitch of the company?
Well, it's been 3 years. I mean, I bet they've changed. I'll give you a little bit longer than the elevator pitch. Today, people would tell you Spiceworks is a network for IT professionals, right? They come there to learn everything they know to do their job, and they have about 10 million uniques a month. But it didn't quite start that way. A lot of times startups, they morph. So we started the company to build a tool to manage a computer network, and our goal was to have it to be kind of touchless. You could download and install this thing and you'd be up and running in 5 minutes, and you didn't actually have to be technical to do it, which sounds a little bit oxymoronic, right? If it's an IT guy, why does he not have to be technical? Well, one of the things we learned in our research when we were starting the company is if you work inside, Macy's or Goldman Sachs or some big company, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of highly proficient IT professionals. And about half of the entire, there's $1.5 trillion a year that gets spent on IT products and services, and about half of that gets spent by 17,000 companies. Those are all those enterprise companies. But there's 17 million that have less than 1,000 employees each. And those average one IT person for every 200 employees. Okay, so for millions and millions and millions of companies, there is one IT person. And a lot of them ended up in the job accidentally, and they don't know jack about how to do it. And so the kind of catch-22 is, I know I need this tool to do my job better so I can free up hours in the day, so I can support people and help them print out the things they need to print and all of these things. But it takes 2 weeks to install one of these tools, and I can't stop my day job for 2 weeks so I can install this tool to make my day job better. And so we came up with this idea that you could download and install this thing and it would set itself up, and everybody said that'll never work. And they're right, a lot of times it won't work. When we did it, it didn't work about 45% of the time. But for the 55% of the time it did work, that was awesome experience for you. Okay, so the first big thing we had to do was get that thing to work and get it to install that quickly without you having to do anything. But that wasn't the really crazy idea behind Spiceworks. Part of that getting distributed so quickly was we made the application free. And the common route to market then was what was called freemium, where I give you a bunch of this functionality for free, and then the stuff you really want, I hold it aside and I charge for it. And that always kind of pissed me off. I always thought that was a little bit like a bait and switch. You tease me with this cool thing, and then I get in there, and now you're like, oh, you really want to be able to use this, open your wallet and pay me $1,000. Seemed a little disingenuous. So, plus I'd come from, my first startup had been a big enterprise software company where our average sales price was $3 million. When you charge somebody $3 million, the day they sign the PO, they hate your guts. They're like, I don't know what you're doing, but you're cheating me somehow because you took $3 million of my dollars, and I know it's going to deliver $20 million in value, but only if the software really works, and enterprise software never works, and don't start an enterprise software company, it's a nightmare. But I didn't, back then in the late 90s, you didn't know any better. So I didn't want to do that, and the physicist in me thought, well, what's the asymptotic limit of a decreasing price? I think it's free. It's zero. I actually thought briefly, not very long, about I could pay people to use the software, but I was like, I'm not that crazy. I'm not. And so I turned to my co-founder, who's way smarter than me. He runs the company today. His name's Jay Hallberg. And I said, you need to go figure out how we make money on free. I don't mean free at just the size or free for these features. I mean free for everybody for all time. Free. Now a sane person would have quit or got his old job back. But he just kind of lit up like a Christmas tree and went away for 7 days and grew this big thick beard, and he looked like a terrorist kind of. And then he came back in 5 days, classic overachiever, and it had this advertising model embedded in a piece of enterprise software which had never been done. And with about this much thought, we're like, well, what the hell? This is probably going to fail anyway. 9 out of 10 fail. Just look at the math. And if you're going to fail, you might as well go down and blaze the glory with people thinking you're really stupid. And so that's what we did. And for about 3.5 years, that was exactly the consensus. Every business meeting I went to, every venture capitalist I called on but one, that's never going to work. You guys are nuts. Why don't you stop doinking around and just charge people money for the software? And I'd say, I take it that means you're not interested, and I'd call on the next guy. And we were lucky we found one kind of visionary venture capitalist for our Series B. Our Series A guy was awesome. It was John Thornton at Austin Ventures, and he just said, "Well, that's crazy, but okay, it's you, so we'll try." And I think in the back of his mind, he was thinking, "Well, they're going to lose money on something. It might as well be something that's crazy." And so I think we did $300,000 in revenue our first year, and the year I turned the reins over, we did $70 million. We still weren't charging anything for the software. About the fourth year, everybody took credit for the idea. People who'd said no 3 years in a row, "I always knew you guys were going to be successful." I was like, well, that's not the conversation I remember. But there's this old expression, success has 1,000 fathers, failure is an orphan. I think that's true.
So, with your other startups and then with this one, you said that you went in with the mentality that, it wasn't going to be successful, and you were waiting just to see what could go wrong. But was there a moment where you, without having the revenue, what the revenue was, without knowing that, was there a moment where you just kind of knew that this was going to be successful or this was going to be different than the others?
I think so. It's hard. You try. I made myself a couple promises. No revisionist history, right? With the benefit of hindsight, don't replay the history to make yourself look better. But there is this just sense you get when one's working and when it's not. Like the two that didn't work never felt like they were getting market traction from the very beginning. Like my wife would be, ask her after, because I go home talk about it all the time. And very early on in both of those failures, she'd be like, "Yeah, don't take this from her. I don't think this one's working." Which makes you kind of mad. If you're an entrepreneur, that's what you are. But I also have learned after 30 years, she's right 99% of the time. But you do get this sense that you're onto something. Like at the very beginning of Spiceworks, long before money, we thought we had modeled how many users we could get. You make up all these models because you don't really know. And so we were going to launch at the end of July, and we thought, well, if we have 3,000 users by the end of the year, no piece of IT software has ever added users that fast. That'll be phenomenal. And we put it up at midnight on July 26th, and I don't know, in the first 7-8 minutes, there's 50 downloads gone. And I was like, ruh-roh. And I think in the first week, there were 500 users signed up. And to sign up, you had to get all the way successfully through an install. It wasn't just give us your name and email address. And I think we hit that 3,000 user mark in about 6 weeks. And we ended the year with 30,000 after 5 months. So we knew we were, if success equals solve a problem people have, that's the way you should think about it in the beginning first. We knew we were onto something. And back then we were adding about 500 users a day. When I left, we added about 2,200 new SMBs a day. And so that's the first, when you see that happening, you've found a problem that people really want you to solve. You don't know you have a successful business, right? So you kind of have to separate those two. But they're both the first one and the third one, which were successful to different degrees. There was that moment where, independent of money, of revenue coming in, you're like, wait a minute, people actually get it. They're using the software for the thing we designed it for, which is kind of cool. Yeah, that's, as a physicist, that's the part I like. I like the problem-solving part. All that make money part, I don't really like. That, which is one reason I, eventually stepped aside at Spiceworks, because when we started it, I told the lead investor, I'm not running a big company. I'm not running a public company. I actually never thought, dirty little secret that every Spiceworks employee knows, I never thought we'd have more than 35 or 40 employees. Because we grew really slow the first 4 years. We ended year 4 at 38 employees. And I thought, oh, we'll try. It'll be crazy. We'll fail miserably. It'll be embarrassing. And we'll just, we'll either sell the technology or we'll wind it down. Then we'll go do another one. Because the process of doing them is what I liked. And then, damn, if they didn't mess it up and make it successful, and I had to stay there 9 years until I could, give it up.
What do you, so how do you build up that kind of perseverance? You say you like to solve problems, but eventually after a while, if you go through some hardships or you experience failures in business or ideas don't go through the way you had liked, how do you keep going on? And is there anything that allows you to keep persevering?
You could be a cancer survivor. That would help. I am one. I'm a leukemia survivor, and all joking aside, it does have this really leveling effect, right? That because you take these things very seriously, you should take them seriously. There's people's lives, their jobs, there's other people's money you're spending. It's very serious, and sometimes those people, not all those people, behave well. Some of those people, usually not your employees, but the people who give you money, like to yell and scream and pound their shoe on the table, and so it's really comforting to be a leukemia survivor when that happens, because yeah, that's not really the worst thing that's ever going to happen to me today. And so it does give you this perspective of putting everything in its place, that if your company fails, people are like, oh my God, how will I ever look my friends in the eye? It's no big deal, really. I've done it twice. My friends were still there after. As a matter of fact, they asked me more questions about the failures than they did about the successes. So that's one. For me personally, martial arts did help. It's helped in a bunch of things in my life, just because of the focus and discipline it required, and I'm not even a particularly good one. But just for me, the cool thing about it was for that hour, there's this immediate feedback that's negative if your head's somewhere else. You usually get hit when you probably shouldn't, and that had this focusing effect for me. And so there were times, I think it brought those two things together, brought a certain calmness to running the business that maybe everybody else wouldn't have unless they'd gone through that experience. And there's so much chaos in a startup. It's good chaos, it's not bad, but it's just there's so much change that you have to be good at just kind of chilling out and not overreacting because of all those pressures, right? The money that's been put in, and when you walk into a room of 400 people and something's not going right, it's a little unnerving. They expect you to have the answer, and you probably don't. Now, my solution was to just tell them. I wasn't a very good liar, and I didn't want to try to fake it. But I would just tell them everything we knew. I go, look, here's what's going on. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know, and here's how we're going to go find out. And these 12 people, here's how I need you to help me. Because if you don't help me, it's probably not going to get done. I can't do it. I'm probably the least intelligent person in this room right now. It's not possible that I'm going to go solve this problem alone. I'm going to need your help. And so involving them, that was part of our company culture, is problems we had, they were going to solve. I wasn't going to solve. It's my job to make sure they get solved, and then I shine a light on them. And some I'd be lucky enough I'd personally get to solve. I like that. It's for the physicist in me. I really enjoyed it. But most of the time, you're not. Somebody way smarter than you is going to solve the problem.
And I've only known you for a short time right now, but you're incredibly inspiring and very charismatic. And
oh my God, you need to meet more people. I got some people I want you to meet.
But
like that young man right up there in the back, I'm going to embarrass him. Like, that is a smart dude. Like, go talk to him. He's easily like 10 times smarter than me. Yeah.
But I mean, like that kind of life story and the kind of cheerful attitude that you bring to those type of situations, It must be, so that's definitely probably helped you grow your network and find people to help you, because I feel like everyone wants to help a person that's very cheerful and happy all the
Well, I'm
time.
not that cheerful. My wife right now is probably going, wow, is she confused? Uh, and it has helped to, kind of had 30 years of an ass whooping to put me in shape. I don't know. All joking aside, I'm really not that cheerful a person. But I am a fairly positive person. Yeah. But I'm not cheerful per se. But I like, and I think this even dates back, pre leukemia. I never, I think because of the way I was brought up and just my personality, I didn't look at things going wrong as, the sky is falling, it's bad. It's probably what drove me to physics. I just looked at it as a problem you had to go solve. And that it might be a really bad problem, but, you, I mean, when I got diagnosed, just to give you an example, the type of leukemia I had is called AML, and and I think this is still true today with current protocols. When you get diagnosed with AML, if you do treatment, there is a 1 in 5 chance you'll be alive in 5 years. That was 17 years ago. Okay. Now, my trick was, all right, so somebody has to be in the 20%, right? So it's going to be me. Like, somebody had to be in there, and I sure don't want to be in the 80%. That's stupid. Why would you choose to be in that group? Like, that guy's going to be dead in 5 years. But I think that matters. I think that, and that's what startup land is about, right? Like, it is the most, if you looked at the starting of, this is incredibly hard to think of now. Take Google, take Facebook, take IBM, take Microsoft, take any company who's gotten to $1 billion in revenue. When they started, that thing was the most illogical construct on the planet. How is this company that is understaffed, under-resourced, under-partnered, under everything ever going to win? You got to be a nut job to think that's going to happen. Like, there's no logical reason to say a $70 million company would show up from what we started. If you would ask me, I would have said there's no way it's going to happen. I did tell people that. I'm like, nah, it's probably going to fail. That's why we won't have more than 35 employees. But day to day, you just can't. You just have to kind of one step at a time look at everything and say, here's how to solve this problem today or this problem in 6 months. And it doesn't mean you'll be successful at all of them. It doesn't mean they're all the right solutions. Or I'm saying that like that means we got it all right. You don't. Okay, we didn't, and you never will. The other trick to startup is you just got to be right 51% of the time. Turn the crank as fast as you can. Okay, and people agonize over, is this the right thing? And at some point, I'm like, it's good enough for now. Fail fast, fail inexpensively, and then just turn the crank as fast as you can, because you'll get more times to try, right, whatever the thing is you're trying. But I'm not sure if you went and talked to those 450 people that were on my watch. Cheerful is the word they would use. Positive, yes, I'll take that, yeah, but not cheerful.
And so, kind of just wrapping it up so we can take it to audience Q&A. The last question: what would you say is the most important thing, or like a trait that an entrepreneur should have besides being able to fail fast and persevere? Is there another character trait that you think that you should have, or any other advice that you may have to aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience today?
Wow, I think there's so many right traits that I think if you brought in 10 of us, you might get 15 really good and valid answers. I think the one that has served me most has been curiosity. That if I peel it all back and you said, you took all these other things, at the root of it, what was driving me was I wanted to see, could we solve that thing? This is one of the things that made me a not great developer, was I liked to prove you could do something, and then I got bored, which does not produce good code. like that stuff needs to work all the time. And I wanted to show that it could work, and then I wanted to move on to the next thing that I could show could work. But making that bulletproof wasn't that interesting to me. And so that, I think for me personally, it wasn't the only attribute, but that curiosity drove a lot of, I think it drove every job change. Forget being an entrepreneur, but often when I changed from one type of job to another, like I was a pre-sales tech support engineer, and I went from a developer to that, and I did that because I was curious about a different skill set. There was something, I was a horrible public speaker, I was afraid of public speaking, and I thought, I bet that would fix that. Little did I know that Steve Jobs would dump me in an auditorium with 1,000 people and then not show up. And then they'd say, congratulations, you're live in 30 minutes, you chose not to come. Yeah. But that, it was, a lot of times that was driven by curiosity more than, I never ever wanted to run a company or be a CEO. Or it's kind of nice that it worked out, but that wasn't really a goal.
Hello. All right. So for any of you guys who have a question, we are now opening up the mic for audience Q&A. So feel free to line up here for a more efficient process and ask away.
No pressure.
Going up here? I got a question for you. So my name is Rudy. Scott, what do you think are the top 3 reasons for your failures, or 2 failures? In hindsight, what do you think you should have done differently?
That is an awesome question.
I knew that.
I need to come hang out with you more. Wow, there's so many. I got to get it down to 3. Let me take the most recent one first, because I think it's the simplest. I think there was primarily one, which was no product market fit. So the last company, Reader's Digest version of UMuse, we were trying to give you integrated messaging across email, chat, text, with machine learning to prioritize that message stream. Okay, and I've been pitched this exact idea by 2 people since I wound down the company, and because we all get inundated with these messages, and so we had this really rigorous way. I won't go into all the details, but there were 3 core principles we were going to test out in sequence, kind of in the order of the biggest failure first, the thing that would mess you up the most, get it off the table first so you can figure out if it's wrong. And we went through all of them, and we never got that product market fit feeling. And what that feels like is you've seen what that success looks like, even in a pseudo consumer space, right? We were targeting the enterprise. You got a poster child of what that looks like. That looks like Slack. In a year, you'll have 250, 300,000 users, and it's growing in this exponential curve. And in a year, those are active users. In a year, after going through 100,000, we had about 12,000. And so you have to look at yourself and go, that's an F. You can delude yourself. We could have raised more money. I have no doubt we could have raised more money. I had a couple of VCs I was talking to. They're like, that's just a big problem, Scott. I bet you can solve it. And I'm like, I don't think with this approach it's solvable, because the facts I have in front of me would suggest otherwise. So that one was pure product market fit. Rounded off, the first failure was a massive cultural failure. It was a company that got, the company was called all.com. It got spun out of my first company. It was originally intended, Motive was a big enterprise software company that did tech support remotely over the internet with a bunch of cool software. And this was originally designed as a lighter weight, simpler to deploy. Then we went a step further and said, well, if it's tech support, I'll add the people, I'll do it with a peer-to-peer network, which was super popular in the late 90s. And to say that venture capitalists flocked to that idea would be the understatement of the century, literally the century. 5 months old, 13 employees, $60 million at a $300 million valuation. Never happened again since. Shouldn't have happened then. And so we raised $60 million. We spent maybe $7 in a year. when other companies in that same time period here in Austin spent 70. No product market fit, right? Couldn't find a price point. Turned out that people get good enough tech support for free. But the bigger problem was that company, because of the time, got kind of slammed together from some Motive employees, my first company, some people from Dell, some other executives, and it was just this cultural mishmash where everybody had different agendas. I wasn't experienced enough to manage that or see my way through it. And so it was kind of culturally just a nightmare, right? As far as there was executive infighting. And now, why is failure so important? One of my co-founders at all.com, a guy by the name of Greg Catawara, awesome guy, he was co-founder at Spiceworks. And when we wind down all.com, my joke is it gave me leukemia because I got diagnosed about 2 months later. And the stress might have. But when I, it's like dating, right? When we wound it down, I'm like, I'm never doing that again. That sucks. That startup thing is for the birds. I am done. But 3 or 4 years go by, and you watch other people start companies, and I was starting to think about it. Went to Greg, was the first founder I asked, and he said we had no idea. We didn't know what we were going to do. But I said, do you want to go start one? He said yes, but you have to run it, and none of this all.com BS. It's got to be only people we know that we trust. I'm not going through that crap again. And so the point of that is this painful, massively painful experience. I think 70 or 80% of the cultural success we had at Spiceworks was explicitly formed out of those mistakes. Very consciously, a number of the things we did in response to, I'm not living through that again. Now, I think we improved on them in ways we didn't even understand at the time, some of them kind of fumbling forward, but probably with good intentions, that now I would try to go replicate those positive things. But we literally had a list of things we were trying to design out. We said, I won't do this kind of business idea because it requires enterprise salespeople and they're jerks. So that's out. And so there were literal business ideas that John Thornton wanted us to do. I'm like, nope, not doing that. That's going to be a cultural nightmare. And he's like, yeah, but it's a hot. I'm like, I don't care. Get somebody else then. I'm not doing it. And I think that kind of purity of conviction, I wouldn't have had that, pre those two experiences. So that was a big piece of it. Probably a never-ending litany of mistakes I made. We'd be here all night, but I think those are the two big ones.
My name's Akash Dharamshi, and so the day after you realize that you're not going to pursue a business idea anymore, I mean, after you've done all this, you raised all this money and you've created a team and you've developed a product, but then you realize it's not working out. So the day when you realize that you're going to stop this project, what does the next day look like for you? And then I have one final question.
Because that one's not any good.
Yeah, that one sucked. And then I think the question I have now is, when you actually have an idea and you have like a business that you want to pursue, what do you think is the quickest way to actually develop the technology? Do you develop that like in-house, or do you work with a contracting team or a consulting team to like speed that process up? So yeah, those are my
that's a good
questions.
bookend there. Yeah, no, that's good. Well, first one first.
Thank you.
I think if you are self-aware, like I'm not sure the way the last one went, part of the way we started it was so that continually we could evaluate this. So while there was literally a day, like when the board meets and you have a meeting and you finalize the decision that you're not going to go forward, but you've been talking about that literally for months as a possibility. So there's you'd like to be able to say, oh, we decided, and then I cried for 6 hours, and I fired everybody, and it was really, but it wasn't like that because, one, that's culturally not how we ran the company. I'll come back to that. But two, if you're honest about the process, you're checkpointing every step of the way. Like before we wrote a line of code, we said, what would success look like? Because I don't want to be in denial. I don't want to be here and convince myself it's working when it's not. Because I know what success looks like. I experienced, you feel it, but you can get into this where you don't want to stop. You don't want to lose people's money. You don't want to let, our company was tiny, we had 12 employees, but you don't want to fire 12 people. So those things all kind of suck. And it's easy to convince yourself it's working when it's not. So when we were sober, before we're drunk, we agreed, if we don't at least look like this, we're kind of kidding ourselves. And then we wrote that down and we put it on a wall, and we educated every employee about it. So when that day came, it was October 3rd of last year, was the actual day. It was no surprise to a single employee. Like, they'd gotten updates along the way. They knew what we were trying to test. The last probably 2 months, I think, were harder for them because they were less experienced. We talked about it a lot, but there were meetings where they went, well, this isn't working and this isn't working. Well, one young employee, UI, woman who was awesome, one of the best hires I've probably made in the last 10 years, but she was only 2 years out of school. She goes, well, if this one doesn't work, we're done, right? I mean, that's kind of what you said. I was like, wow, my work here is done. She can go start a company tomorrow. I was like, yeah, that's what it means. And the funny is, one of the most senior engineers, all of a sudden it was like became real, and he was freaking out a little bit. But we tried really hard, just from day one, actually, to say, if these things don't happen, we said we're not going to push a rock up a hill. If it's not working, we're not going to go do it. So I never, there's a tiny little bit, on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 2, just the reality of, okay, we're here, shut down all the stuff on AWS, here's your last day, here's your severance. That wasn't fun, but it wasn't probably what you think it would be because of that process. Flip side, your second question. I'm not a big fan of outsourcing anything because it's hard to know what's really going on. Okay, so while you might think you're going to get more speed, I've never seen. I'm assuming kind of apples to apples, right? That you can get enough of the engineers you need yourself. I've never seen a third-party group do as good a job as employees because they don't care as much. They don't own stock in your company. They don't come in every day and hang out with you. They don't share the dream. All of those things aren't the same, and they never will produce the way your team will produce, assuming they're equal. Now, if you can get 5 times better developers and it's a really short project and it's really compartmentalized, then maybe that would be better. But I've across 4 companies, I've never done it that way. We've only outsourced things that were at peripherals of the system, and whenever we even used developers that weren't like in the same building as me, it was really constrained chunks, like really small pieces of the system. They did a great job. My last company, we had a phenomenal developer who lived in Brazil, and we found through Upwork. But it was go do this one piece of UI. I tried to give him more of the project. We tried to bring him in more, but it was a little bit more of a lifestyle business to him. But in general, I'm not a fan. Now, you might talk to 2 or 3 other people and it's worked perfectly for them. That's just my bias. But then I like to muck around with the product myself. So that's hard for me to do if you're in another place. Well, every company I've started, we've done this thing called time and motion study, where we pick whatever the target audience is, the target user, and I physically go hang out with them for a couple hours apiece. And I have some thesis I'm trying to prove or disprove about a problem they have. And it's been my experience, if you just talk to them over the phone, there is something you're going to miss. Everybody tries to do it that way. You have to physically go sit next to them, and you are going to see them do something, and a light bulb's going to go on, and they would have never told you that over the phone. And that becomes the kind of, I hate to use the words requirements document, but that kind of becomes your requirements, your thesis for here's what we need to go build to solve this problem. And sometimes it will be, counterintuitive. I've even, in my first company, we asked everyone, there were 30 companies we visited, and we said, what would you want if you could have anything in the, to solve tech support problems? And the most sophisticated thing they came up with was basically a ticketing system with a knowledge base built in. Like, it's really hard for users to think outside the box. And that is not what we built at Motive. We built this direct connected thing over the internet to let you reach out and change configuration settings, all kinds of stuff like that. But they're great at evolutionary feedback. If when you have built something and you say, I want to make this better, they, way better than you, will tell you the 10 things you missed in their day-to-day life. But they won't tell you to go build an electric car. They'll tell you they want your internal combustion to get 30 miles a gallon instead of 20. That's the kind of feedback it's good for. So I always started that way first, and then what you would now call a minimally viable product, we just try to come up with the absolute smallest thing that would address that core pain, and then get that out in front of a few customers and see what they say. So it's very similar to the process you read about today. You're inclined to build too much stuff, even today. I think most people, it's really hard to separate the I'd like to have features from that one thing that, here's a way to think about it. Find the one feature that will let them suffer the pain of all the features you don't have. That one feature is so valuable, they'll say, well, you don't have these 29 things that everybody else has, but I don't care because this one, like, that's the thing we never found at my last company. Those 3 pillars we had were, none of them, either separately or together, crossed that threshold, and that's why it was my conviction we should just stop. If one of them would have been close, I would have done it, but we weren't even close. And that's what they do in their head. Like, oh, I'm going to not use this product that's out there and reliable and from this big company, and I'm going to use yours. There better be something it does that is amazing. And if it doesn't, maybe it's week 2, maybe it's week 4, they're going to bail.
All right, we have time for one last question, and this is a question from Amy.
Thank you. So when you're the founder of a company, the company's like your baby, and it starts to grow and it moves in different directions. And at some point, the founder has to start thinking about handing over the reins. And nobody can be good at everything. And could you say a few things about that moment when you knew it was time to bring in new people and maybe transition somehow?
Yeah, mine was a little different. I think everything you said is true in general, although there are examples of where that wasn't true. Bill Gates at Microsoft is a good example. Now, what I think he did a really good job is he brought in lots of skills underneath him to kind of do those things he wasn't great at. But I had kind of, again, this was less hard for me because I decided before I started the company that day was going to come. One of the advantages of starting Spiceworks post-leukemia was this conviction, I will spend no time doing things I don't like. Period. I'm not going to argue about it. And so every investor that came into the company, I told them that. And when you're tiny, they're like, yeah, okay, but you'll change your mind later. And then there were a couple later that had a lot of problems remembering that was a conversation we had had in advance. There were a bunch of things, to your point, you have to be good at if you're going to run a big company. A lot of them have to do with process, a lot of them have to do with people. And I think the leadership part of it, leadership and management are 2 very different things. The leadership part of it, I probably didn't suck too horribly at. The management part I wasn't great at. And so But even the leadership part, as you get over 500-600 people, gets harder and harder, at least for me, because I can't touch them all. I've learned that for me, if I can touch them all personally, or very close to personally, I can do a good job as it scales. And I came up with a bunch of ways to cheat at that at Spiceworks that went way past the scale I thought it would work at, which was probably around 100 people. But even that had its limits, and so for me, I had always talked openly with from day one with the founders. This day's going to come. Now maybe it'll be a co-founder, which is the way it happened. I was lucky. He had a different set of wants and desires than I did. Or it might be somebody from the outside. I kind of, this is going to sound horrible, I kind of didn't care. I thought I did a pretty good job on my watch for 9 years, and then I told you well in advance, like, you know, T0 minus 30 days, here's how it's going to play out when the time comes. So we'll be prepared, and board members were prepared. I mean, 2 years before I transitioned the company, we started to look at options, and we put Jay in the role of COO, and he did a fantastic job, no surprise. And so that gave them confidence that it would work. And but if it hadn't, this sounds horrible to say, it kind of would have been their problem. Because I told them well in advance, and my first principle was, I'm not going to spend time doing things I don't enjoy. Life's too short. I don't think that's normally how it goes. But I think people screw that up a lot. It's a really good question, because I think it gets screwed up a lot. Because people don't, when it's small, you think that day's never going to come, and then that day comes, and you're like, you can't take my baby away. Look, I will tell you this, and I think this is a sad statement, and I don't say this because I was lucky enough for Spiceworks to be one of them. We got about halfway, probably 3 or 4 years in, and I started to study this. One of the advantages of having 450 employees is you probably interviewed 1,000 to get to that point. Probably 1,500. I interviewed every person we hired, but about halfway through, I started to ask them about the culture of the company they were coming from. And so there were probably a good 400 or 500 that I did that with. And even if you take small companies, I bet maybe 2 in 10 would have a culture like Spiceworks, okay? And where the average is, it's just about raise the money, build a product, build a business, sell it for a bunch of money, and whatever the environment is like, well, not rinse and repeat, but it doesn't matter what the environment is like. Like, I don't really care what your working life. I hired you, you do what I say, we're going to be successful because, like that's the way Steve Jobs was. And the subtlety of Steve is lost on most people, right? And I think half of what I learned about managing people came from Steve, and it was in the don't do this bucket. It wasn't in the do this bucket. Okay, there was some cool stuff in the do this bucket, but about half of that bucket I wasn't smart enough to go do because it wasn't him. But that other bucket I could not do, right? And because he wasn't very nice to people. And some of it worked, and it probably uniquely worked for him, and it wouldn't work for the rest of us. But even if it was, I wasn't sure that's what I wanted attached to my name. And so you'll get to decide. You get to decide all these things as a founder. Where she's going with this is you'll get to decide how the machinery works. And everybody that talks to you and gives you money doesn't care. They're going to say they care, but if there's ever a place where the ends justify the means, it's venture capital. Nobody will ever say that to you, but trust me, they don't care. I have seen more egregious behavior in founding CEOs. You just imagine everything you've ever read about anybody in public, any scandal of any kind. I have seen that behavior in founding CEOs, and investors have looked the other way because the company was going well. Because they don't want to lose their money. And until it gets so bad that they are forced to fire the guy, they will take no action. And there might be some of you that go, that's awesome, that's a perfect job for me. And that's, I'm not judging, it's not right for me, but if that's, right for you, hallelujah, you found your spot. Go become a founder and take venture capital. I think some would like to do the right thing, and it's hard. If that company's doubling in revenue every year and all the employees are saying, you're a sexist pig, they're like, yeah, did we mention it's doubling every year and people are using the product? It's really, I don't envy their position. It takes a lot of character, but her point was you're going to have to decide. And while I used to joke about the CEO handbook, there isn't one. And there is, it's this litany of no right answer. It's just your answer. And in the moment, you get to decide, is it left, is it right, is it up or down, and your moral compass is probably going to be what guides you. And wasn't a co-founder. I didn't start the first company. I was lucky. I got to go along for the ride and just watch and learn and hope I didn't get fired. And I was 38. Like starting one at 22, trust me, you did not want to work for me then. I'm not even sure you want to ask that gentleman because he knew me. I don't even think you wanted to work with me when I was 22 or 24 years old. And so I think it's pretty unreasonable what we ask out of these super young founders, given all the things we've touched on. And so that's what I spend my time now doing is trying to work with first-time founders and CEOs who haven't done it before, because sometimes they don't know what they can get away with. They don't know what they should do. It's input. It's not a vote. They run their company. They do whatever they want, but at least there's somebody they can ask. And you hear people say it's a lonely job. It always used to piss me off when people whine about a job where they get paid, 150 or 200 grand a year. That's a pretty good job. But that's the dimension on which it's lonely. Is you're sitting there like, do I add 3 more people or fire 5? I've literally had my best salesperson, is sexually harassing somebody and he brings in $2 million a year. And you're doing $4 million a year. You gonna fire him? I did. It was hard. There's lots of, board members are kind of even not so delicately going, well, yeah, we're with you, but how are you going to replace that revenue? And so there's all these kind of seedy little things that don't look so cool. People don't talk about as much because it doesn't make a great story about Google founders in their garage. But trust me, if you talk to them, I can only imagine because they're in California. I saw all kinds of stuff working at Next for Steve because he was a colorful guy just by himself. Forget what all these executives did. But it's kind of you to say, but these go hand in hand because you only get to do that if the company gets, if you go from 10 people to 20, and it only goes from 10 to 20 if you pass certain thresholds, either product thresholds or revenue thresholds. So it is all tied together, but suffice to say, you'll get to make all those trade-offs, and you'll get to do it your way. And if you that always sounds, even for me, it always sounded cool until there's nobody to pass the buck to. It's just different. It's not right or wrong. It's just different. He did a bunch of retreats. I joined Next in 1988. I was there until we sold the company in 1997 to Apple. And I don't know, there were probably 7 or 8. I don't know about Paradise, but yeah, he'd close down the whole company and take it to some place for 3 days. And there was a lot of work that got done. There was a lot of non-work that got done. I'll just leave it at that.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you, Scott.